the question that I had that came to me right away when I was thinking of you was, I was curious to ask you, how did you spend your 20s before building BNI?
So I've always been a believer in lifelong learning. For the route that I took was, a more formal educational route. I did a bachelor's, a master's, and then eventually a doctoral degree. So I spent a lot of my 20s in school and working. A few years ago, I wrote a blog, and people can find it on ivanmisner.com. Go to ivanmisner.com and do a search on life lessons. Just for that phrase, life lessons. I wrote this blog, probably 4 or 5 years ago, and it was, and I wrote it I wrote what I put in the blog just a few years ago. I wrote more than 40 years ago, and I wrote this in my 20s. What was my life plan? I didn't know what business I was going to be in. Didn't know if I'd be working for somebody. Thought I was going to go to law school. And I actually was accepted to law school and changed my mind. So I realized that my life would take turns that I didn't expect. So I did a reasonably generic life plan. But this was my life plan in the 20s. And you can find it on my blog, ivanmisner.com. The 20s, I said, those should be my learning years. Those should be the years where I pay my dues. I'm prepared to work crazy long hours and be a sponge. That's what I felt my 20s needed to be. My 30s, in my mind, was about establishing myself in a career. Picking a professional lane and moving forward after I'd worked really hard to figure out where I wanted to go and be a sponge in that area. My 40s were my growth years. That's where I felt whatever business I was in, I would build that business. I'd create a reputation. I'd continue with lifelong learning. And in my 50s, I wanted to be at the top of my game professionally. Hopefully build some kind of a professional reputation or successful business. Now, you'll see I don't say anything about what business I'm going to be in because I didn't know. But wherever it was, that's where I wanted to be. And then in my 60s and beyond, I wanted to be the elder statesman, spend time working in my flame and not in my wax, which is a concept I talk about a lot with young people and business people. And I think it's amazing how that goal or that plan has played out so incredibly accurately. And I think one of the reasons was I wasn't too specific. I was, kind of a little more broad, but in retrospect, it feels like I wrote it after the fact and I did not. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And
so in my 20s, I wanted to be a sponge, just learn as much as I could.
And that's a very similar approach that I'm taking. Even during this epidemic, I like to get out and knock on doors and get some business. I think, so I really get that part. And I've been with building BNI eventually, right? Obviously you developed a lot of opportunity for business people to network and gain more business. And how about students? How can students apply very similar tips of networking to find jobs and land careers for themselves?
So a couple of things. I talk to students a lot. I was a professor for 16 years at a university, adjunct faculty. I was on the board of trustees for another university for 8 years. So I got a lot of experience in the university system, besides being a student. And one of the things that I hear students say to me is, where do I start? I haven't built a network. I mean, I've got friends, but I haven't really built a network. And so my first answer to them is an old Chinese proverb. The proverb goes like this: when is the best time to plant an oak tree? And the answer is 20 years ago. When's the second best time? Today. So, the answer to students who come to me and say, I need to build a network, I haven't really done that, what do? I tell them, don't worry, you're young, start today. And you can actually start today with the people you know. You know people. They may be other students, they may be family members, they may be neighbors, and that's where you begin. I have seen the research done. The last one I saw was, I think, done by USA Today, that showed an extraordinarily high percentage of new jobs come from referral, not from advertisements. From referrals, not advertisements. That is, somebody referred somebody into that job, and then from that they got an interview and were hired. And so I tell young people, start with the people you know. Go to them and say, who do you know who is in this field? I want to be in business. Who do you know is in business? I remember when I thought I was going to be an attorney, I went to lawyers, and I had one or two lawyers that mentored me on what the law was. And so I've had, various mentors throughout my career. So find people who are in those industries and ask them questions. That's the place to start. But use your existing network to grow your network.
That makes a lot of sense, because I think a lot of students, they go for the very traditional routes. They apply online, dropping off their resume, and they forget to tap into what they already have, their existing network, and developing that network further.
Right. So let me tell you something I did. I got a job. I found a job. This was 1981. I had been this is 2020, so we're going through the 10-year census. And in 1980, I was the field operations supervisor for the census in 1980, and I supervised a lot of people, got a ton of experience. I wanted an executive position, and I saw this great role in a transportation company in Los Angeles. It was online. Well, not online, there was no internet, but it was being advertised. And so I said, I applied, but I knew I was one of, I think they had 150 applicants for this job. It was an executive position reporting directly to the president. And so you can do a hybrid, is what I'm suggesting, Roman, is if you find a job online or in an ad, then reach out to people you know and say, does anyone know someone at that company? And I happened to find a state legislator, because I had been involved in politics, who said, I've got some press releases on this company. I'd be happy to have one of my people call and just say, hey, we're from Senator so-and-so's office. Got a young man who's applied. Would love to have you consider him. I'm like, yes, that would be fantastic. But then he gave me the press releases. So I went in armed with all kinds of information about the person I was about to be interviewed by. It was a great experience. So I got information, I got a referral, but it was something I saw online. So I used a hybrid. If you can find out information about the person who's interviewing you, for example, the president was saying, okay, so you have your bachelor's degree from Cal Poly University, Pomona, and you're working on a master's. At the time I was working on my master's at USC. And I said, yeah, I understand you have a double bachelor's degree. That's really unusual. And I don't remember what it was. It was a bachelor's in accounting and something else. And he was like, yes. How did you know that? Like, oh, I just did a little homework. Now, this is back before you had Google, right? So now it's maybe not quite as shocking, but you can find out a lot about people online. And you have a conversation where they show you are interested in that job. So do your homework, get a referral. It's okay to apply online, but don't just rely on that. You will be one of the many if that's the case.
It makes a lot of sense. And even as you're explaining the whole process of how students can find jobs by using both the online methods, the traditional ones and non-traditional, it really reminds me of sales. And it seems like finding a job and gaining business is one thing. It sounds different, but it's done the same way, in a similar way at least.
It's done in a similar way, yeah. I think that the people that know you, like you, trust you, are much more likely to refer you. Now, referrals for jobs in many ways are really, sometimes a little bit easier. There's a study done years ago that ended up being published as the strength of weak links. Grosvenor, I think, wrote that. And the strength of weak links is a very effective concept as it comes to referrals for jobs, it's not as effective as it addresses referrals for business. You know, people have to really trust you before they refer you to a friend. Whereas they may just know you and they'll refer you for a job opportunity because they'll say to the person, I don't really know them, but what I do know, I think they might be a good candidate. It's a little easier for jobs actually to build those kinds of connections.
Okay, this is great. And I had a really fun question in mind. I was going to ask you, so Ivan, what advice would you give yourself when you were 20 years old, going back?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think I would say to myself two things: continue to live your values. Your values. You will never have regrets if you live your values, because don't worry about making mistakes. You're going to make a boatload of them. It's inevitable. So learn from those mistakes. Always live your values, and don't stress out. I'd say don't stress out so much. Things will work out okay. You know, you tend to be very focused. So, keep, if I have any superpower at all as a person, it's that I am a dog with a bone. I am very persistent. And so sometimes that can lead to get a little, maybe a little bit stressed out. So I tell myself, just do your best, live your values. Things will work out pretty well.
Okay.
Oh, and you'll get the beautiful girl. So it's all good.
As long as you are consistent with your values and you're persistent with them, even if you make mistakes, it's okay. It's going to work out, right? Yeah,
people make mistakes as long as those mistakes aren't mistakes that really go against their values. I wrote a book about 1.5 years ago now called "Who's in Your Room?" Who's in your room? And it's all about the people that you spend time with, the people that are in your life. And I'll give you the context in a brief 2 minutes. Imagine you live your entire life in one room. Mm-hmm. And that one room has only one door. And that one door is an enter-only door. So that when people come into your room or into your life, they're there forever. Mm-hmm. You can never get them out. Mm-hmm. Now, luckily, this is a metaphor, but Roman, if it were true, would you be more selective about the people that you've let into your life?
100%. I would have to be.
Everybody says that. So our question from the book is, why aren't we then? Why aren't we more selective about the kinds of people that we let into our life? Because I would argue that it is in fact more than a metaphor. We interviewed Dr. Daniel Amen, the brain scientist who had the PBS specials, neuroscientist and psychiatrist. And we talked to him about this, and he said, people's fingerprints are all over your brain. When you have any kind of relationship with them, personal or professional, those experiences are all over your brain, and they will be with you forever. And so the kinds of people that you let into your life are going to impact your life for the rest of your life. And so what we talk about in the book is, how do you make sure to allow people into your life that you want there? And everything is based on values. So you have to look for their values and your values and make sure that they're not incongruent. They don't have to be the same values, but they can't be dissonant with yours. They have to be resonant with yours. And so if you live your values and surround yourself with people who have resonant values, not the same, but resonant, then I think you're going to live a good life. And I have been blessed to live a pretty good life.
And I really get that concept, because what I'm finding is the people that we spend time with, no matter how subconscious the impact they're always making some sort of impact. It's leaving a footprint.
Yes. Yeah. People in your life are generally either engines or anchors. They're either going to drive you to be your best self in some way, or they're going to be an anchor, pulling you down. And that comes oftentimes back to the values, or the values resonant. And oftentimes people who have dissonant values are really, they're anchors in your life, and they're taking you down. And those are the ones that, you want to cut loose from your life.
I feel like once you spend enough time surrounding yourself with great people, facing someone that's opposite that's dissonant with your values is shocking almost, because you're so used to being in a good place, right?
Yeah, and you can your spidey sense becomes better, right? I mean, you're able to say, okay, this is not the kind of person I want to hang out with. When you're consciously thinking about whether this is somebody you want to have a business or personal relationship with. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the things that we talk about in the book is that you have to know, in addition to values, you got to know your deal breakers. What are deal breakers? Things that you just don't want to have any kind of relationship with this person. And usually people say honesty. That's one. Okay, I get it, but you got to go deeper than that. So here's an example of a deal breaker that my wife and I both have with other couples that we spend time with. So we spend time with other couples, and here's the deal breaker: they have to treat each other with love and respect, and they're different. Love and respect are different. They have to treat each other in a loving way and a respectful way. Now, look, I've been married almost 32 years. I maybe haven't always been as loving or as respectful as I could be, but you spend a little time with somebody and you get it, whether they're treating each other lovingly and respectfully. And so you create these deal breakers. You say, that's not okay. And when we created those deal breakers, we realized that we were hanging out with some couples that really did not treat each other very respectfully or very lovingly. And we pulled back from those relationships because that was not the kind of, those weren't the kind of couples we wanted in our life.
That makes sense. I mean, it's because I never had to think about it that way since I'm still 20, but I see that there's a whole different level to it too, with different dynamics. There's a different values can be at play. That makes sense.
So at your age, most of your life has been a revolving door of people coming into your life without your control or without your consent or without your understanding. But you're now at the age where you do have more control and you do have consent and you can have total understanding about who you're allowing into your life. And it takes some maturity. It's hard to find a 14-year-old that has that consciousness of who should be in my life or who shouldn't be. We're all a little bit different, but you're at that really critical age in your early 20s where you got to get it. If you don't get it by then, you're going to have trouble in your 30s and 40s. And I've seen people get out of that trouble. I have someone very close to me who finally at about 31 got it, that she was surrounding herself with the wrong people and has turned on a dime, but it's a lot harder later in life.
Well, I really feel that because what I have done in the last 2.5 years is door-to-door sales, really tough job, commission only. And if you have the wrong people in the team, your sales go down, your mindset crashes, it becomes very difficult. So I learned that lesson through experience. And I wish they taught it at earlier stages in our lives, in school or our parents or anyone. So by the time we enter the professional life, we're able to identify where should we be and who should we be with, who should be in our room.
And that's right. And we don't teach this in colleges and universities anywhere in the world. We don't teach social capital, emotional intelligence, business networking. We don't teach any of that. And I think it's a tragedy that we don't, and that we definitely should. But I don't see it happening anytime in the near future.
Mm-hmm. And I had a really different question. With you've spent over 3 decades building BNI, and at some point you had to decide to build it. So how did you decide to take this route of building your own organization and not something more traditional, like being in a specific career under someone else's company?
So I started as an employee. I worked for the government, the Department of Commerce, for a short while, and I worked for a nonprofit organization. I worked for a manufacturing company. So I got a little bit of experience in a few areas, and I came to the realization when I was about 25 that I just didn't like working for other people. I liked running my own show, and so I started a consulting business. At about 26-ish, 27 maybe, I started a management consulting business as I was working on my doctoral degree. And I really decided that's what I wanted to do, is I wanted to be a consultant. I wanted to help people in business. and I kind of fell into BNI. I had gone to a lot of networks that were really mercenary. Everyone was trying to sell to me. And I had my consulting business. I was in my mid to late 20s, and everyone was trying to sell to me. I'd leave those meetings and I felt like I'd been slimed. You know, I had to go home and get a shower. And then I went to these other networking groups that were totally social. It was happy hour and hors d'oeuvres, no business was being done. I didn't like those either because I wanted to do business, but I just didn't want to be sold to constantly. So I formed one group without the intention of having thousands. One group that fit what I felt was a healthy process of networking. Instead of being mercenary, I wanted to focus on business, but not be mercenary about it. Instead of being totally social, I wanted to focus on relationships, but do business. And the glue that would hold it together in my mind was this principle that I brought into the organization called Giver's Gain. This idea that if you give business to people, you build a relationship, they're going to help you in some way as well. It's predicated on that age-old idea of what goes around comes around. So I formed one group, and I discovered that necessity is the mother of invention because I was not the only person that was looking for something like that. And people started coming to me and asking me to open a second group and a third group and a fourth group. And in a year, I had 100 groups. I'm sorry, in a year, I had 20 groups. In 1 year, I had 20 groups. And it was at that point that I said, okay, this is something much bigger than I anticipated. And I have always, since I was your age, taken between Christmas and New Year's, and I would take at least a few days, if not all week, and reflect. And I'd set goals. Where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? Where do I want to be at the end of next year? And how did this year compare to my goal last year? And that year I was like, what the hell just happened? This was not in my plan at all. And that's when it hit me. We don't teach this in school. And we need to teach it in business. And there needs to be a process. And it was in December of 1985 that I decided to scale this organization. We now have over 9,500 groups in more than 70 countries around the world.
It's incredible what can happen within a long period of time, even when it starts with something really small, like a group of people in a coffee shop that you guys had.
Exactly it.
And since you guys do most of your meetings, well, you've done all your meetings face-to-face, and now with COVID-19, things are moving to social media and being on video. How do you feel that social media and having to be online is affecting the way people network these days and build relationships?
Well, so, I was in a tough business for COVID because we had 9,500 weekly in-person meetings. Luckily, the CEO for my company, I'm the founder. I brought in a CEO a number of years ago, and he kind of saw this coming, and we transitioned within just a few weeks to online meetings. So we have the same BNI meeting that was in person is now online through the duration of this process. I wouldn't be terribly surprised when this is over if we end up with some kind of hybrid system. I still think that in person is the most powerful. To be able to see somebody face to face, not just digitally face to face, but three-dimensionally face to face, I think is more powerful than something like this. This is a good backup plan, I think, for now. But I think we'll go back to in-person meetings largely. But the genie's out of the bottle. I think it's going to be some kind of hybrid. So I'm not opposed to online. I'm for it. I used to get, Roman, probably 20 years ago, maybe, certainly, 20 years ago, I'd get people who would, particularly the media, they would say, isn't the internet going to put BNI out of business? And so I said, starting in, by 2007, I had this really figured out. We started in 1985. By 1996, 11 years after we started BNI, we had 500 locations. The internet really got rolling around 96, okay? So from 96 to 2007, the next 11 years, we went from 500 groups to 5,000 groups. So how would the internet affect networking? I think it will affect it positively, and it has with BNI. And I think moving to an online hybrid version will do nothing but also affect it positively. We'll continue to grow because I think it's another tool in your toolbox to network.
Mhm.
So to me, it's
And
not either or, it's both and.
it both. And
Yeah.
like you said, the face-to-face, it can be more powerful. And I really get that because going door to door in the last couple of days during COVID-19, we follow our guidelines. But what I found is people are really receptive because they haven't had a lot of human interaction in the last month and a half. So I find that people are tired of being just on video. People are craving that interaction. So I can see how that could be really powerful going back to BNI. And it could actually grow it even further because people are able to go back to normal interaction.
Yeah, I think when we are, I like to call this the great pause. It's all about your mental state. And I don't like the idea of lockdown or quarantine, but we've all been forced to pause. And I think when we're able to hit the play button and get back out there, I think you're right. I think it'll go back largely to in-person meetings. But I do, like I said, I think the genie's out of the bottle. You're going to see even more digital meetings in the future.
Okay.
I
So
wrote about this in an article on Entrepreneur. I'll send you the link if you like, where the future of face-to-face meetings. And I wrote this 2 years ago, and I said the future of face-to-face meetings will eventually be mixed reality technologies, like 3D holographic technologies, because the technology within 5 to 10 years is going to be as commonplace as an iPhone, mixed reality technologies, according to Linden Labs think tank. So I think it's inevitable, and we may not exactly be doing meetings like the Star Wars Jedi Knights, sitting around a room where there's a holographic Jedi and a real Jedi, but it'll be something like that. And when we get there, I want to be Obi-Wan Kenobi. Just putting that out there.
Ivan, from all these questions I've asked you, is there anything else you would like to bring up? Anything to add?
So I mentioned that I had this superpower of being very persistent. If I had any superpower, that was it. I think you want to be successful in business or in life, you got to do 6 things 1,000 times, not 1,000 things 6 times. And what I see a lot of people doing is doing 1,000 things 6 times. They're jumping from this to this to this to this, and they don't understand why they're not achieving success. And by the way, it doesn't have to be 6. It could be 5. It could be 7. But it's doing a handful of things 1,000 times. That's the way you achieve success. And so you talk to your mentors, read books, watch videos with people who they resonate with you. Their values will resonate with you. The kind of goals they have are resonant with you. Use those mentors to determine what are the things that you should be doing over and over and over again. And then do 6 things 1,000 times. Everyone I know who's been incredibly successful in a long-term situation is somebody that understands the power of 6 things 1,000 times.
Understand that part. I was lucky to have a mentor when I was in grade 12 and back in high school who taught me that lesson when I was going to all places at the same time.
Yeah.
He told me that focus is what will give me results, and I'm finding it more and more. I'm finding it to be more and more powerful as I do more of what I've been doing instead of jumping around and trying everything. I've done that earlier, but now it's time to be a bit more focused on just a few things.
Yeah, and when you're young, it's okay to try some different things, but once you figure out a general direction, then that's when you want to do that 6 things 1,000 times.